Urmila Devi Dasi has been practicing Bhakti Yoga and meditation since 1973 and teaches internationally. She earned her doctorate in education from the University of North Carolina and has been a professor in sociology and education at Bhaktivedanta College in Belgium. Urmila has authored many books and dozens of articles. Her upcoming book with Rukmini Devi Dasi, Dr. Ruchira Datta. And we have two of her books here, so in the boutique, so you're welcome to check that out. And let's give a big hand to Urmila Devi Dasi.
So last night we looked at 6 different ways that we can feel prosperous as one model for connecting our own nature to the way that we maintain ourselves. And today we're going to look at a different model, one that's much more widely known, but I think often misunderstood and often misapplied. So we have this very famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Chaturanyamaya Gunakama Vivargashaha, Tasya Kartam Abhimam Vidyakartam Avyayam. According to the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the 4 divisions of human society are created by me, it's Krishna speaking. And although I am the creator of the system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer being unchangeable. So there's 4 varnas. Varna can literally mean color. 4 varieties of guna karma. Guna means our qualities, and karma in a sense means our work. So we might ask, why are there these 4 categories of work? And the term we're going to use here is a field. Now we're going to use this word, a field of work, perhaps a little differently than maybe used in general. Like someone might say, I'm in the music field or I'm in the science field, and we're not using quite those categories. But before we get into defining those categories, I'd like to ask each of you to suggest some different career, and we're going to look at that in terms of these 4 categories or fields. So any career, just name any career. Architecture. Okay, what is the role of architecture in society? What does architecture provide for society?
A safe place to live.
Yeah, building.
Okay, building, so safety, security. What else does architecture provide?
Cultural identity.
Cultural identity, okay.
Designing.
Designing, so it provides art and beauty. Anything else that the field provides?
Organization structure.
Okay, some sort of function and structure, so safety, function, and beauty, and cultural identity. All right? And let's think of another field. Another job. What would be just another job? Again, this is the first time I'm teaching this in this format with this presentation. So any and all feedback, positive, negative, specific, is very welcome.
Farmer.
A farmer. Okay. So what role does the farmer provide in society? Food. We're assuming they're farming food. They might be farming textiles or medicines or coffee even.
Farmer also looks after to maintain the soil, so that the soil does not get polluted.
Okay, so this is important, that the farmer is interested in something that's very sustainable. They want to be able to farm next season. Yes. Now, a farmer is taking the land and maybe animals, the air, water, and turning it into something usable. They're basically taking nature and turning nature into wealth of some sort, food or medicine or clothing. So does the architect do that? Is the architect taking nature and turning it into wealth? You think?
Taking natural ingredients and...
Well, it's recombining them to create something that works in society and that adds aesthetics and identity to society. But they're not really creating wealth. Okay, so the farmer has a function of creating a sort of wealth from nature. So it's a somewhat different role here. Can you think of another career?
Doctor.
A doctor. Okay. So what's the role of a doctor?
Healing, treatment,
Healing, treatment,
Supporting people.
supporting people. Okay, what else?
Health, protecting.
Health. What other role?
Adding to the general knowledge.
There's a lot of knowledge going on with a doctor. A lot of healing has to do with the diagnosis, knowing what is the proper diagnosis, what's the proper treatment. So we really have a whole lot of knowledge and wisdom being transmitted by a doctor. Sometimes surgeons are considered in a somewhat different category. Doctors. Are doctors generating wealth from nature? Like a farmer is doing?
doctors are the users of the doctors are the users of
They're the
wealth.
users of that, but they're not turning nature into wealth. And are doctors creating, like the architect, are they creating beauty in society?
No.
Not really. Another career?
Teacher.
The teacher, all right? What's the teacher's role?
Pass on education.
To pass on education. So their role has to do with knowledge and wisdom. Are teachers, yes?
Oh, mentorship.
Mentorship, they may be providing mentorship. Are they, yep,
Inspiration.
inspiration. Okay. Are they doing the kind of function of an architect? Are they providing for like function and beauty in society? Not directly. Not directly.
Yeah, the indirectly.
Indirectly.
Doing our thing.
Indirectly, but not directly. And are they, like the farmer, are they turning natural resources into wealth? Not really.
Not in this.
Yes.
They might be teaching how to do
They'd be teaching how to do it, but they're not
the direct.
direct.
There's more of a social and community component to it.
Yes.
Role too.
Yes.
But if you consider people's abilities, also natural resources, the teachers are helping to bring that.
They're
out.
helping to do that. But I was thinking in terms of nature. So the farmer's working with the land, the water, the air, by the way, also, and animals, creatures, and turning that into usable wealth. So we've looked at 3 general categories of roles that fit with 3 of the 4 fields. No one's mentioned a career in the 4th field. And these ancient models of fields have to do with that kind of a role in society. And so you could have, again, other definitions of a field like the field of music. So some people in the field of music may be primarily providing beauty, but some people in the field of music may be primarily providing wisdom. And so according to this model, they'd be in 2 different fields, although the term field can be used in a different way. So for this particular presentation, we're defining fields as what is the primary role that that career provides for society and for individuals. Now, my co-author, Dr. Ruchir Datta, and myself, we're really struggling to come up with English names. For the 6 prosperities, we use the Sanskrit names. The Sanskrit names are really denoting something that's very complex and very nuanced, and we didn't want to put a one-word English translation on them. We could have done the same thing for the 4 fields, but the problem is that many people are familiar with the Sanskrit names and already have a lot of misconceptions associated with them. So we thought rather than starting off with something that might be pejorative to a lot of people, in one way or another, that people would have some positive or negative association with those Sanskrit words, we thought we really got to come up with a one-word English translation. But I'll tell you, our one-word English translations don't do full justice to the complexity and nuances of these fields. And also, we're using these words very specifically to define these fields. So I tested this with my super critical family members. They were my test case. And they said that, well, you could define those words this way and that way and this way and that. I said, that's true. But Ruchir and I decided that we were going to use, after months and months and months of trying different words, that we decided on 4 words that we're going to use, and we're going to be defining them the way the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Purana, and basically the Rig Veda describe the Sanskrit terms. So we're looking at these four terms: the field of artistry, the field of resources, the field of ideas, and the field of government. And the only field that no one came up for a career in was government. So we would put the architect in the field of artistry, the farmer in the field of resources, the doctor and the teacher in the field of ideas, though sometimes people might say that a surgeon would go in the field of artistry. Now, when Rajira and I were first starting on this book, one of our main questions was, why in the ancient Sanskrit wisdom are all of the hundreds of thousands of possible careers categorized in these four fields? Why four? And why these four? Because we could categorize careers in so many ways. So what is the benefit for individuals and societies? So one thing we looked at is that these four fields exist in all but the most simple human societies. So in some super simple indigenous cultures, these four fields don't exist. But other than that, even in most indigenous cultures, these four fields are operative. And they're operative when society is functioning well, they're operative when society is functioning poorly. In contrast, there's specific careers that kind of come and go over time. No, there's not much need for blacksmiths today. Right? And there's careers today like computer programmer that didn't exist 100 years ago. So if you're going to talk about careers in terms of great specificity, it's not going to be universal in terms of time and space. That the principles are going to be changing over time and space. And also, at any given time, maybe there's a great need for doctors or there's a surplus of doctors. So specific careers, not only do they come and go in terms of society, they may also come and go in terms of availability and need. But again, these four demarcations of field always exist. So even if you can't have your specific career in the field, you can move to some similar career within the same field. But the main reason that we came up with why the ancient Sanskrit wisdom gives these four fields is something we'll be looking at in depth at this time tomorrow. And that is that the dharma of each of these four is different from the dharma of the others. And what makes you an expert in one of these categories will make you a failure in the others. Your strength in one becomes a weakness in the other. And when people cross fields, they create havoc in society, especially under these four categorizations. Other ways one categorizes careers might not have that kind of effect. What makes you a good musician might also make you a good manager of a music store. But in this case, the very qualities that make one excel in one field causes difficulty in another, according to these characterizations. And they may be the source of our unhappiness in our work or our happiness in our work, and plus our contribution to the society as a whole. And as I mentioned yesterday, our main interest in delving into this at all was seeing that for people to practice spirituality, it helps if they could spiritualize their career. If they could spiritualize the activity that most people spend a huge amount of their time on. If you figure, commuting to work, which people I guess aren't doing right now with the coronavirus so much, and then your time at work, and then a lot of times with our gadgets, we're bringing our work home and so forth and so on. And if all that time we're in a place where we're in the wrong place, where our nature, our propensities, what allows us to function well is not being supported, then our career leaves us drained, unhappy, may cause us friction with other people, and hampers our development of our spirituality in general. Whereas if we're in the right place, engaging in our spiritual processes is that much easier. Now, as I alluded to yesterday, there's a lot more to career dharma than just matching one's nature to one's career. Rudira and I were able to find 8 principles. This is only one of them. But we believe that this is one of the most important. It's one that's emphasized throughout, like Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas, and the Vedas themselves. And it's the one, I think, that most engages us. You know, we might not care so much as to whether or not we give our type of prosperity and charity, but we're all very interested in being in a place where we can flourish, being in a place where I feel, wow, the way I am, the way I function, what's good and what's right for me, what makes me feel the most like myself in a positive way is also the way that I live. And it's also the way that I can contribute to society. Now, in the natural world, other than human beings, that's just a given. Every creature is most itself in the way that it eats, the way that it sleeps, the way that it reproduces, the way that it maintains itself, and the way that it contributes to the web of life. So if we human beings can also do that, then we will find our lives to be overall harmonious. So as we go through the fields, and I'll write this on the board, if I can get this out without knocking this out. So this is what we're looking at. Now again, this first session is primarily just so that we can understand what these fields are. And then in the second session today, we're going to be looking in far greater depth as to our own proclivities and how those relate to the fields. Mostly what we're doing this first hour and a half is just defining them. But as we go through and define them, I'd like us to be thinking about what specific careers would be in those fields. And sometimes that's a little tricky. Like I was saying, some people in the music field are mostly in the field of artistry, and some people in the music field are mostly in the field of ideas. So it's not always that clear. Okay, and then we want to look at our own experiences in work, our experiences with others' work. I'm going to run out of space here. What is the value of that field? And what prejudices might we have? Or criticisms? There's a Sanskrit aphorism, Atmavan Manyate Jagat, which means that we tend to see others according to ourselves. We tend to judge others according to our own ideals. And because the main reason that these 4 fields have been demarcated is that each of them has a different dharma. So, and what's a benefit. Oh, okay. Thank you. Hopefully I can get it out without bobbing myself in the head again. You'll help me. Great. All right. It's very, very common for a person who's naturally in one field to see the strengths of the other field as wrong. That's extremely common. That we think, oh, you know, they're not principled. Because the principles and ideals of one field are a hindrance in another. And we'll get into that more tomorrow in the first session. Yes?
So it says something in the music. In today's world, you have people with music. And then in order really study music, you have to start a music school,
You may have to become a music teacher.
a music teacher, and then
Well, this is a very interesting question. Is a teacher of music in the field of artistry or in the field of ideas?
and also the person who is running a music school, you need somebody who's taking abilities and things like that. So do we
Excellent, excellent. Hold that. Hold that. Okay, so we're going to look first at the field of artistry. Now, one of the persons last night said you should put the label on each slide, but I didn't have time to do that this morning. But at least I added labels before each group of slides. So, something. Okay, so the field of artistry. And the main benefit of the field of artistry is that it provides to society what's called rasa. Rasa means taste or pleasure. Everything that everybody does in life is for the purpose of enjoyment. Anandamaya Bhyasat. We are all pleasure-seeking beings because we are all originally beings full of pleasure. So everything that we do, everywhere we go, everything we say is for the intention of enjoyment. But it is only the field of artistry that provides pleasure in society directly. The other fields may provide it indirectly, but only artistry provides it directly. Now, in the science of rasa, which is explained by Bharat Muni, he talks about 12 different ways that people enjoy rasa. 5 are what's called direct, and 12 are what's called indirect. So the different ways in which people have pleasure are, first of all, in relationships. There's a neutral relationship. Oh, that celebrity, that movie star. That's a kind of indirect relationship. There's a service relationship. Like I was noticing one of the swamis, there's someone else who was following her around and serving her and taking care of her. Then there's friendship, which is generally with equals. There's parental, which is taking care of children or teaching or guiding, mentoring. And then there's romantic relationships. So those are considered the 5 primary forms of pleasure. And then there are 7 secondary. So there's comedy, humor, joy, wonder, like see the great ocean, that produces a kind of pleasure. Compassion, which also includes sadness. And you might say, well, how is that a kind of pleasure? But people go to see sad movies all the time for pleasure. Ghastliness, which you might say again, how is that pleasurable? But people, again, they like to watch horror movies, or if you say, oh, that's disgusting, someone else will say, what is it? What is it? Right? Fear, again, people who do extreme sports or watch scary movies, something that's exciting. Chivalry, which includes giving in charity and feeling very righteous, sporting events, and this last one, anger. People's reason for going to political rallies, sports, people's sense of, injustice in society. Now, all of those forms of pleasure exist in a spiritual form, and they also exist in an illusory form, kind of a reflected form. But the field of artistry is what provides that. Because the field of artistry is where people are providing function and beauty in society. If something works, it's because someone in the field of artistry has made it work. If something is beautiful, there's some input from someone in the field of artistry. They're providing all the function and all of the beauty. Now, another response I got from my family that I didn't have time to change. That one in the bottom left, those are construction workers in India. So my family said, people might not realize that that's construction workers. Somebody who's making furniture. They're providing function for society, but also beauty. Dancers are providing just primarily beauty, if we think, yes? Anyone who's manufacturing, all the manufacturing is in the field of artistry. Yes. other ideas of careers in the field of artistry? Yes. If you're not the landlord, then yes. If you're the landlord, you're in another field. Other thoughts? What are careers in the field of artistry? Yes.
Could things like IT, like dealing with things like networking and
A lot of IT is in the field of artistry.
yeah.
Cooking often, not always. There are some people who are cooking who are in the field of ideas, but the vast majority of cooks are in the field of artistry. My guess is some of the cooks here in this ashram are in the field of ideas instead of artistry. If you're cooking as a way of imparting wisdom and truth, you're in the field of ideas. If you're cooking as a religious or spiritual work, you're in the field of ideas. Almost always. The people who are producing the things, not the people who are running the manufacturing. The managers in manufacturing are in another field, but the people who are assembling the iPhones, assembling the computers, they're all in the field of artistry. Yes, goldsmiths, blacksmiths, jewelry makers, carpenters.
What about people that do things like makeup artists or hairdressers?
Definitely. Depends what kind of business. If you knit your own scarves and you have some small business selling your own scarves, you're in the field of artistry. Although you have something in common with those in the field of resources, which are in the field of artistry. Yes. That's a good assumption, but it's an incorrect one. We're looking at matching nature to career in our upcoming book, Krishna willing, through two lenses. One is through the 6 kinds of wealth. And I decided that I would teach that in the 2 satsangs because I figure that's more or less the same audience. But the other lens is what's called 4 fields. And the 4 fields are taught, all the way in the Rig Veda, the most ancient of the Vedic literatures in Sanskrit, categorizes careers into 4 fields. So for these, rather than using the Sanskrit terms, my co-author Ruchira and I decided to pick English terms of artistry, resources, government, and ideas. So this is a different model for matching nature to career. And in our second session tomorrow, we're going to combine the 6 ways of being prosperous, 4 fields, and our general career experiences to come up with what's most important to us. Well, one reason why you have certain things that could be in either artistry or ideas is that there's a certain similarity between those 2 fields. And one similarity is that people both in artistry and ideas tend to be very self-satisfied. They tend not to be very ambitious, but for very different reasons. People in the field of artistry tend to be not very ambitious because they're happy with a simple life externally. And people in the field of ideas tend to be not very ambitious because they're satisfied internally. So the reasons are very different. And the mood is very different. But because there are those 2 similarities, whereas the other fields, resources and government, the Bhagavad Purana describes those people as being always thirsty. That doesn't mean for water. It means that they're always wanting to expand. Whereas in artistry and ideas, people tend to not be so interested in bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more. But the demarcation is, in artistry, your role and your function is beauty and function in society. Now, in the Vedas, the people in artistry are compared to the legs of the universe. And it's very interesting that in the Bhagavad Purana 2.10.25, it says that Bhagavan himself, Vishnu, is in charge of this society. Without this field, society stops functioning. Nothing can go on. They're the support of the field. In the subtle universal body, there would be the Mula chakra. And the Mula and the Swadhisthana chakra. The Mula dealing with the general function, physiological function, and the Swadhisthana dealing with, again, pleasure. This is the field that provides all the pleasure in society. If these people didn't exist, nobody would enjoy anything. Life would be just empty. So the Swadhisthana deals with beauty, sweetness, emotion, and the Mula again deals with function. Beauty. There is, some people in the field of artistry pretty much only provide beauty. Some people, I don't know if there's anyone in that field that only provides function, though. I mean, the people who pick up the trash, don't they also contribute to beauty? Even the people who do the plumbing. First of all, good plumbers are interested in the beauty of their plumbing, even if no one else sees it. And doesn't having good plumbing also contribute to beauty in society? If you've ever been to a place in the world, and I know you have, where plumbing isn't being done very nicely, it's also not very beautiful. Yeah? Right? I've struggled to try to find any career that's solely functional, that doesn't add something of beauty, you could say, even in a negative way, like somebody picking up the trash or somebody making sure that the sewage isn't flowing out all over the ground. But certainly there are some careers that are more tending to just pure beauty. So some of the fine arts are just pure beauty. I mean, the function that they provide is, again, rasa, of pleasure. But they're not providing function in the sense of, that things work. Well, it's interesting you're going there, because that's what we're going to do starting at 2 o'clock. From 2 to 3:30, we're going to look at what's my proclivities that would indicate which of these 4 fields is best suited for me, and then what's an expert in the field. Now, generally in the sacred literature, the Sanskrit sacred literature, the descriptions are almost entirely of those who are expert, not so much of the proclivity. But the problem is you're not an expert in the field until you've been trained in the field. And we'll look at that starting at 2, so I don't want to get too much into that right now. But yes. And you're also touching on what we're going to talk about tomorrow at noon, which is why you shouldn't switch fields. If you have somebody working in the field of artistry who's not suited for the field of artistry, they're going to suck the art out of it. They're going to automate it, or they're going to do something to it that takes, and that's true for all of the fields. And this is why, again, Ruchira and I, we spend a lot of time and effort and research. Why did the ancient Sanskrit literatures choose these 4 demarcations? Why? Why 4? Why not 10? And why these 4? And we saw that as soon as you switch somebody, they take the life out of that field. They remove its ability. Like if you took heart muscle, stuck it in the brain, it just, something doesn't go right. All right, so here we're looking at this more from 2 to 3:30, but we just think right now with this field of artistry that, how is this how we like to move in the world? We looked at different careers and looking at these experiences with work and others' work. How do we feel about this career? And do we have any prejudices
about this career. So some way that we feel about that, oh, these are just the laborers, or just the workers, or, to really examine that for a moment. And are these the kind of careers that we maybe would do as a hobby? Maybe we'd like to do some painting once a week as a hobby, but we wouldn't want to do it 8 hours a day. Or is it the kind of thing that we really want to do all day? So I'd like to just take about a minute and just kind of reflect on this field before we go on to the next one. And you could even write maybe 2 or 3 sentences. How much do I like to engage in these kind of things? And I like to use the word play. What do they say? If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So I'd like to look at this in terms of play rather than work. How much do I like to play with the items in this field? Could I do it all day? Part of the time? Not at all. Does it attract me? Okay, we're going to go on. Again, we're going to go much deeper in that in the second session today. So this time we're just touching on it. So now we're going to go to the field of resources. So in the field of resources, the mood is on expanding wealth and profit. How to use, and by resources, we're talking about natural resources, something from the air, the water, the land, and living creatures, plants, animals, so forth. How to use resources effectively and efficiently with the distribution of products. So it's in this field, and this is the only field, where people are really generating wealth. In the other 3 fields, people may be moving around wealth or using it or transforming it, but this is the only place where wealth is being, so to speak, created. In one sense, it's a transformation because all wealth comes from nature. But this is the only field where people are taking nature and turning it into usable wealth. Now, there's more abstraction in this field. As we go through these fields, we're going to be coming to increasing levels of abstraction in terms of what constitutes expertise. If we think like in the field of artistry, there can be competitions for who's the best dancer or who's the best runner, and there's very specific, although it may be different from culture to culture, but there's very specific models for what constitutes expertise and how to train to be expert. But in this field, it's a little bit more abstract. So how you could be a good business person or a good farmer is not quite as easy to judge. There's much more difference from culture to culture. And even within a culture, the definition of success in this field is a little bit more of a variety. So, should a business be run like a family? Or should it be run with more emotional distance? That's a level of abstraction. To what extent should owners and managers involve subordinates in decision making? So again, that answer will vary depending on what culture you're in. And what's going to be a good business in one culture is not going to be a good business in another. Should problems be solved by executive decisions, by changing rules, or by collaboration? I just finished a fascinating book about cultural differences. And the French evidently wanted to solve business problems by executive fiat. Okay, this is the way we're going to do it. The Germans by making more and better rules. And the Dutch by collaboration. And so there is just a very different idea about how to run some sort of business. So any kind of business effort is going to be in this field. Now, as you can understand, a lot of people in this field are employing people in the field of artistry. In fact, people in the field of artistry are employed in the other three fields. But they themselves are not in the field of artistry. The mood in the field of resources is wealth generation, wealth expansion, and profit. Which again, in the field of artistry is not there so much. You know, you're making some furniture, you're making some pots, you're knitting something, and you're happy to sell some to maintain yourself, but you're not trying to have some international business in pottery. And generally people in the field of artistry are even put off by that kind of idea. They're like, why would I want to take so much trouble if I'm happy in my life? Why bother? But in the field of resources, it's always more and more and more. So I have a very good friend in this field who was managing a natural foods company, and the owner of the company sold the company. He had some shares, and he said to me, I could now retire at 30 if we purchase a house in a place that wasn't very expensive. I said, why don't you do that? I thought I would do that. If I could retire at 30, I'd sit down and study the scriptures. And my friend said, but I don't want to retire at 30. He said, so I purposely bought a home that was expensive and an expensive car to force me to go out and work so I could earn more money. And then the same person after a while started their own business and told me, I'm now working half the time from when I work for somebody else and making more money. I said, why don't you use the rest of your time to write a book? And my friend said, I don't want to write a book. I want to go to full-time work so I can be earning 3 times as much money. Are you seeing already how the mentality in one field doesn't translate to another? Yeah? So the mentality of people in this field, so we'll see you later, yes? Mentality of people in this field is expansion, expansion, expansion. Now, when you consider that these are the people that are feeding the society and clothing the society, providing the food, clothing, medicine, and all of the raw materials for society, you can see that if they were just satisfied with being very small, it might not be the best kind of service for society. It's from this field that the main charity comes from. So these tend to be the main charitable people in society. Why? Because they're moved to generate excessive wealth. That's what's pushing them. And so they're often the people who give an abundance of charity. These are also tend to be the people who are the main patrons of the arts. So these are usually the people in this field who build the museums, right, who subsidize the artists and the dancers. And this has been true throughout history. This is also somewhat true for the next field, the field of government. But it's particularly true for the field of resources. Because they're always pushing to expand and generate more and more and more. So they're the ones who are putting funds into helping those who are less fortunate, and they're the ones who are putting funds especially into the pure beauty part of the field of artistry. As you mentioned, in the field of artistry, there's this sort of line from beauty to function. And those at the pure beauty end of the field of artistry, you know, they're not really providing a function. Yeah? There's people in this field, in the field of resources, who tend to appreciate the pure artistry of the field of artistry, although they don't create it. And so they tend to be the main people who fund it. They also tend to be the main employers in society. So these are generally the main people who are running some sort of business or agriculture or trading that are providing almost all the work for almost everybody in society. By the way, as we go through the fields, each one has a smaller and smaller amount of the population in it. So the majority of the population is in the field of artistry, somewhat less in the field of resources, less in the field of government, less in the field of ideas. So you can see if people in the field of resources were like, yeah, just have a little business, and if we sell, 2 or 3 pieces of pottery a day, that's fine. They wouldn't be able to provide this function of generating wealth to support the whole society. So their thirst for profit and their thirst for expansion is necessary. So in the universal body, they're compared to the digestive system. They're the one taking in raw materials and turning into nutrients for the whole society. And in the subtle universal body, they're in the Manipur chakra. The chakra that's in the abdomen. These are literally the people who feed society. Okay, now again, we're just looking briefly in this session. How do we feel about this field? Are these the things we like to play with? You have some people from the time they're 6, 7 years old, they're starting a business. Right? By the time they're 12 or 13, they're maybe employing their friends. And is this what we like to play with? Is this how we find our pleasure? Maybe we like to work with natural resources. Again, not just growing a few marigolds in your garden or a few tomato plants. Not like that, but to really have a business. Now again, we might be attracted to this field in the sense of a hobby. That, yeah, I like to have some garden, or I go Swiss, I love to have garden growing Swiss chard and tomatoes and eggplants. But it was a very small garden. I had 3 raised beds. They provided my family with food in the harvest season and tomatoes all winter, if we just used 1 jar per week. And I dried strawberries for the year, which, by the way, makes your house smell wonderful when you're drying strawberries. We had fruit trees, so it was a little hobby, but I never sold any of it. And I certainly wouldn't have thought, wow, I want to get more and more and more. I have a friend who runs a Himsa dairy farm, and he always wants to get more cows. I want to rescue more cows. I want to rescue all of the cows in my locality. So I want to just do this all the time, taking care of the cows. Or as I was saying, my friend who's like, I don't want to just work 3 days a week if that will maintain me and my family comfortably. I want to work 5 days a week and get more. So is this something that we could look at as a hobby, or maybe we're not attracted to it at all? Or is it something that we feel, yes, this is really something that I love to do? And if you think about, if you mentioned some careers, I've mentioned some, but other people input about what careers are in this field? Farming, yes. If you're farming for profit, not if you just have a garden in your backyard. Pretty much almost all business people are in this field. Retail, again, if it's big. If you have a hobby and you're selling your stuff on Etsy as a little thing, then it might still be in the field of artistry. Or just where I say in India, there are people who fix flip-flops. Right? Like, they fix flip-flops. Can you imagine getting flip-flops fixed in America or Canada? And their shop consists of a piece of cardboard box on the ground and a little toolkit. So, they come and they put their cardboard box on the ground, and they open up their little toolkit, and they charge like 5 or 10 rupees. 70 rupees is $1. And they fix your flip-flops. So they're not business people. That would be in the field of artistry, not in the field of resources, although they're running a little business. Manufacturing, if you're running the manufacturing, not if you're on the line. Banking, yes. Anything to do with banking and trade, yeah. And this was sort of the same question that he brought up. In each field, you're going to have leaders and managers. And the difference is, do they have the mood of that field or do they have the mood of the field of resources? So you can have people that manage something in the field of artistry whose mood is in the field of artistry. And one of the differences that you see is, do they have this thirst for expansion? And are they in the mood, again, of wealth generation? So that's one of your main demarcations. Okay, we're going to move on to the field of government. And again, please keep in mind that Richard and I came up with these 4 English translations for these Sanskrit words. They're probably not the best possible translations that you could get. So because human beings are social animals, as soon as you get more than a very small number of human beings together, somebody has to organize it. There has to be some system of defense, some system of oversight of the group as a whole, some kind of peacekeeping. Now, the difference between managing a society and managing a business, like in the field of resources, is that government is responsible for everything in the domain, and a manager in the field of resources is just responsible for that specific domain. So one is looking at the flow of barley, and the other is looking at the flow of everything: electricity, water, education. It's far bigger. And in the field of government, you're much more managing the people rather than managing the resources. And in the field of government, you care about the interest of everyone in the domain rather than some sort of a subset of the domain. So it's a much broader interest. Now, again, you can easily see how this field is a little bit more abstract than the field of resources. I mean, if you're going to say, what's a good government? You know, like, what's a good shoe repair person is very concrete. What's a good, you have to go? Okay. If you want to say, what's a good person in the field of resources, it's a little bit fuzzier. If you say, what's a good person in the field of government, it's even fuzzier. What kind of government? A direct democracy, a parliamentary democracy, a monarchy, right? In the world today, there's so many varieties of government, and what's a good government? I mean, people may think their government is the best, but what's a good government is a little bit harder to define. And what's a good leader in government is obviously quite hard to define, and different people have very different ideas about what's a good leader in government. So you're thinking protection from internal threats, protection from external threats, creation of rules, creation of order, large-scale services and infrastructure. Now, we should mention that this field doesn't just apply to official countries or states or cities. It can also apply to landlords. So if a person owns an apartment complex and they're collecting rent and they're providing services, it's almost like they have a very mini city where they're making sure so the rent is in lieu of taxes and they're making sure that everyone's taken care of. This field also includes a lot of NGOs. So there's a lot of non-government organizations that do government-type work. Right, the United Nations, of course, comes to mind. But even on a very small scale, I know of organizations that provide, you know, medical, food, water, education in various parts of the world, in addition to the government. Right? Now, it's not exactly the same as a charity that people in the field of resources give, but these are the people who are on the ground. People in the field of resources will provide the money for these charities, but the actual execution of these charities and the management of these charities is done in the field of government. And these people also have this idea of expansion, expansion, expansion. We want to take care of more and more and more and more and more people. So I have a good friend who's originally from Italy, but he's been working in India for decades and decades and decades. And he started out just giving out free rice to poor people. That was how he started, just like a bucket of cooked rice. And pretty soon that expanded to feeding people whole meals on a big scale. Then he opened medical facilities, He opened schools. The schools that he opened were specifically to take care of children from the slums, what he called the poorest of the poor, people who lived in, cardboard and tents, not because they were at a yoga retreat, but that was actually, they lived in tents, not exactly by choice, where the children, especially the girls, often would receive no education at all, no health care at all. Basically, both parents would be out working and the kids were at home just taking care of each other. So he provided these kids with medical, with food, with education. So I worked with one of those projects, and as my background is in education, so I'm particularly involved with the school portion of his projects, and I was always wanting to increase the quality. But whenever money would come in, whenever more money would come in, he would want to increase the quantity. He'd say, now we can educate another 20 kids. I said, why don't we use this money to better educate the 1,500 kids we have now? He said, no. He said, if we don't educate those 20 kids, they're going to be completely illiterate and neglected. Let's take them and educate them. So this is this mood again of expansion, of bigness. Always do more and more. So people in this field certainly want to do things better, but they're also looking at how can I protect more people? How can I do more? 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 Now, unlike those in the field of resources, they're not so interested in getting more just for themselves. The people in the field of resources think about themselves, certainly, and we'll look at this more tomorrow in our first session, and then the extra they give out. Whereas people in the field of government are interested more in giving out. And although we've certainly seen in history that people in government will live very luxuriously, we've also seen in history that the people in government may exhaust their treasury in a time of need, if they're experts in the field of government, in order to help people, which people in the field of resources are not so inclined to do. And we'll look at why in our first session tomorrow. But that's a leading distinction. So people in the field of government, the systems they're looking at are bigger and broader, and they're more interested in giving. Because in the government field, you're not generating wealth. You're collecting, redistributing. You're collecting, redistributing. You're not generating any kind of wealth at all. You're collecting it in the form of taxes, fees, or rent, and you're redistributing it to help people in ways that's difficult for individuals to do on their own. Now, we talked about management before, but we're going to bring it up again. Many people assume that all leadership roles must be in the field of government or maybe in the field of resources or both, but that's not a fact. Each field needs its own leaders. So, although there are certainly people in the field of government who are leaders, not everybody in the field of government is a leader. Your police officer on the street is in the field of government, but they're not a leader. They're not the president. They're not the prime minister. They're not the secretary of the treasury. And you might have a leader in business or a leader in agriculture, or you might have a leader in dance or a leader in basketball. So it's leadership in and of itself is not confined to any one field. Although we do tend to associate concepts of leadership with this field of government because the leaders of human society are often people in government, the queen, the king, the president, the prime minister, and so forth. But again, what field depends on the mood. So in the universal body, these people are the arms. And it's interesting that, of course, government is the field responsible for defense and protection on a small scale in terms of a police officer, a security guard, and on a large scale in terms of the military. And we use the word arms also to mean weapons. But also arms are connected with care. Right? They're not just, arms are not just for fighting. So we can think of this field as like the big mommies and daddies of society. And we find often in Sanskrit literature that a lot of the words for people in government are like that. And even today, we talk about the father of the nation, the mother of the nation, are often people who are working somewhat in this field of government, taking care of everybody, protecting everyone, making sure everybody has what they need. Seeing, and we'll get to this more in our second session today, but really seeing everyone like family. Not only human beings, but seeing the animals, the plants, any living being within their sphere as being under their protection. And of course, this is the anahata, the heart chakra, in the subtle universal body. The heart chakra. Anahata. So I have one relative who's very much in this field. From the time he was a little boy, he always wanted to have weapons, right? Soon after my granddaughter married him, he was showing me his stock of different ancient and modern weapons. And I was like, whoa. Actually, one of them had been used in a battle, and when he opened it, I'm like, there's some really heavy energy in connection with this. Maybe we can do something with this weapon. But this mood of wanting to take care of people. You know, it was quite interesting. He ended up joining the Marines in the reserves. But one of his sorrows was that a lot of the other people in the military didn't have the right mood. They didn't have a mood of protection and care. It really disturbed him. And he decided, no, I don't want to be, although this is what I want to do, it's not being done right. You know, my country's fighting wars that aren't for protection, that aren't about cares. The people here, they're not high-class people that care about others. And he ended up getting a job as a security guard. And I said, you know, this isn't what you originally had in mind. He said, but I love it that I'm taking care of people. I'm taking care of the people who are shopping here. I'm making sure they're safe. I'm making sure they get what they need. I get to wear my gun. Okay. Yeah. It would include the people in government who manage health. So, you know, the Secretary of Health and Welfare, the Secretary of Urban Development. Now, this doesn't include, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow in the first session, it doesn't include the people who are doing the bureaucracy in government who are all in the field of artistry. Because the people in the field of artistry can assist. And we'll look at that even a little bit more in our second session today. So if there's people who are inclined to the field of government, but as an assistant, they may be someone in the field of artistry who works for people in the field of government, or people in the field of artistry who work for people in the field of resources, or people in the field of artistry who work for people in the field of ideas. That depends. If they're running healthcare like a business, they're in the field of resources. If they're the people who are turning the patients over in their bed and emptying their bedpans and checking their blood pressure, they're probably in the field of artistry. If they're the ones providing the wisdom and the guidance, they're in the field of ideas. And if they're the ones making sure that people in society have proper health care, that the healthcare industry is properly regulated, that people who are getting medical degrees are actually qualified, then they're in the field of government. Excellent question. Which is why, as I said in the beginning, the way the word field is often used in careers is different as to how we're using it. Because you could say the field of medicine. But the field of medicine, according to this ancient model, you could end up in any of the four fields. So these ancient, I mean, from the beginning, the Rig Veda was said to be Apurusheya. It's supposed to have existed from eternally, not to come from any human source, that describes these four fields of work. It's because each of them has a different mentality, a different dharma, a different way of being good, a different way of fitting and working that will help us to be properly situated. Thank you. Some other thoughts about careers, specific careers in this field. Almost entirely in the field of government, most of them. Yes. Now, someone who's just researching law might end up in the field of ideas. And the law clerk is in the field of artistry. but the judges, the lawyers, people who are administering justice are all in this field of government. And that's something we're going to hit on a lot tomorrow in the first session. And once you see this, you go, wow. What is the mood of people specifically in this field that they're contributing to society that other people just don't? This focus on justice and ethics and morals, that's one of the primary aspects of people in this field, that's what they care about. So if you can also think for a moment, do I have prejudices against this field? Criticisms, or do I enjoy it? And to what extent do I enjoy it? Is this something that I like to volunteer for now and then? Is it something that I like to do all the time? Is it what's really driving me? Is this the area that I like to play with? So if you can take also a minute and think or write about that. Right? So yes, these are people who are willing to put their life on the line for justice. All right, the last one we're going to is the field of ideas. So this is people who provide wisdom, guidance, truth, education to society. Research, study. It can involve teaching anything. So people in this field might be teaching dance, might be teaching business, they might be teaching law, if they're doing it to transmit wisdom. Counseling, a lot of different kinds of therapy are in this field. Religious leaders, people who are religious leaders who give religious training, philosophy, people who lead religious rituals, who lead religious worship. Also in some traditions, the cooks in religious organizations are also in this field, if they're cooking as a part of a religious ritual. Now, just because this is the field of the intellect doesn't mean that all intelligent people are in the field of ideas. Just like there are leaders in all four fields, there are highly intelligent people in all four fields. There are highly intelligent people in the field of artistry, in the field of resources, and in the field of government. And not everybody in the field of ideas is a towering intellectual. So some of the people in this field are engaging others in religious rituals of worship. They may not be intellectuals or scholars at all. But they're interested in transmitting truth and wisdom. And that can be, it's not always words either. It could be, say, mathematics. But going to mathematics, not for the idea of, how can I make a better telephone, but how can I understand the truth? They're looking at, we talked about increasing abstraction, but this is also abstraction what you're looking at. So in the field of artistry, you're usually looking at your own craft. In the field of resources, you're looking at a resource and how you're making it flow for yourself and others. In government, you're looking at the systems of the society, and in ideas, you're looking at the whole thing. Now, sometimes people in the field of ideas, though, are very minutely focused. Some people in this field of ideas are just looking at, the mating habits of the one-toed crab in this particular river. So sometimes it gets very narrow. You know, when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, they said, you're going to know a whole lot about very little. Right? That when you get your PhD, you become the world's leading expert in a very minute area of knowledge. So some people in the field of ideas really specialize, and some are more generalists. But the ideas about truth and wisdom. And again, although this is the realm of intellectuals, not everyone in this field is an intellectual, and certainly not everybody in this field has very high IQ, and there are high IQ people, or high EQ people, or however one wants to think of intelligence in all of the fields. Sometimes what happens is someone says, oh, you're really smart, you should go into the field of ideas. Or you're a leader, you should go into government, but that's not necessarily true. Now, I talked about this from the beginning, that somebody who's a musician might be in the field of artistry, or they might be in the field of ideas. There's ways in which these different fields have some overlap, which we'll look at more in our first session tomorrow. But are you producing music for rasa, or are you producing music for wisdom? You know, I can think of some musicians, Bob Dylan comes to mind, that his music wasn't that artistically beautiful. He didn't have the most attractive voice. And what was he producing his music for? For truth and wisdom, right? So that's in the field of ideas. Whereas somebody who's trying to produce something that's just very musically attractive, and of course there's different definitions of that. There's certain kind of music that I don't particularly find musically attractive, but somebody does. But if the main idea is for pleasure, you know, to increase people, remember we talked about those rasas, people's feeling of friendship, or their feeling of romance, or their feeling of comedy, or sometimes their feeling of disgust, or fear, or anger. If that's the main mood, then that's in the field of artistry. And we also find that people in the field of ideas often, just like all those three fields, people in the field of artistry assist, but very often people in the field of ideas may use artistic means to teach. They may use art to teach, they may use music to teach, they may use dance to teach, they may use drama to teach, but the purpose is to teach. The purpose is to impart wisdom. The purpose is not to create something. Like I'm trying to create artistically beautiful slides, and beauty is very important to me in my career. But my purpose is not to transmit beauty and give everyone an aesthetic experience. So, according to the Rig Veda, in the universal body, these people are the brain. And in the subtle body, they're the Visuddha chakra, which is speech, and the Agya chakra, which is wisdom. So in this field, people are supposed to guide government to rule fairly and wisely. Indeed, they defined what is fairness and what is wisdom for people in the field of government. They establish ethics and honest practices for people in the field of resources. They provide design models for people in the field of artistry who produce function and beauty. So they're basically giving the template for the other three fields, how each of them can follow the dharma of their field and become expert in their field. So that's the main role that they're contributing to the society. But of course, if all you have is a brain, you can't do anything. Okay, so field of ideas, what sort of careers are here in this field? Teachers, scientists, priests, researchers, philosophers.
Some writers.
Definitely there are authors, but probably not authors of romance novels. So it depends, what are they writing and what are they trying to do? most counselors and therapists, most people who are into psychology, psychiatry are going to be in this. Now, if people are physical therapists, they might be in this field, or they might be in the field of artistry. Medicine, you have parts of medicine that are in the field of artistry. Traditionally, surgeons are considered in the field of artistry. They're more compared to plumbers and electricians. I hope I'm not offending anybody. But because they're not so much transmitting wisdom and knowledge, they're more working with the mechanics of the body. So things in the field of medicine that are more mechanical and dealing more with beauty and function. Yes. Definitely. Yes. Well, in the field of government, there's going to be some introspection and self-reflection on how one is managing the field. But we'll look at this tomorrow in our first session. There's a difference in that. There's some, both the field of ideas and the field of government deal with big pictures. And there are certainly many philosophers also and researchers who are in the field of government, but they're much more practical minded, and they're much more looking at how we can research to help people and to take care of people. The field this has the least in common with is the field of resources. So ideas has the most in common with artistry in terms of a feeling of satisfaction and not wanting to expand. It has most in common with the field of government in terms of looking at a bigger picture. Okay. Yeah? If they're interested in profit and expansion, they're definitely in resources. If they're doing something as a business, even though they may be very inventive. If they're looking at inventing things, yes. Well, if they're just being creative, they might be in the field of artistry. If they're thinking about bringing, again, wisdom and truth to the world, coming up with something that will really bring wisdom and truth and enlightenment to the world on some level, then they're going to be in the field of ideas. Probably. Yes. Also, in government and resources, people are more interested in fame generally. Some sort of recognition. Yes. Everybody wants a pat on the head from somebody sometimes. It's not like everybody wants to be appreciated. That's natural. But as far as what's really driving you, like I have a friend who's, her whole thing is morals and ethics and justice. And she's always angry about something. And I was talking to her husband and saying, she needs some work in this field, government. And he said, well, she tried volunteering here and there, but she never got any recognition, so she quit. And I said, oh, there you go. So we can take just a minute to think about your own experiences with the field of ideas, prejudices and criticisms. And there's prejudices and criticisms for each of these fields. Right? People in the field of ideas, they're impractical, they're wasting people's money, wasting time, doing something that isn't of any value to anybody, think they're better than everybody else. Right? There have been whole societies that killed, right? Stalin tried to kill everybody in the field of ideas. Your own experiences, how much value do you place on, how much do you like to play with language and math and thoughts? Not at all, as a hobby, as something you'd like to do for hours every day. often. Actually, one of the sannyasis, I think she was saying that last night, and she was talking about, you go to the Agya or the Anahata, and I thought that was very interesting. So yes, that's true. But I was referring mostly to the universal body called the Vishwarupa. That in the Bhagavad Purana, especially, somewhat in the Bhagavad Gita in the 11th chapter, but in the Bhagavad Purana, there's many chapters that are dedicated to the fact that God can be understood as the universe. And that these different fields correspond to different parts of the body of the universe, of the legs, the digestive system, the heart, the arms, and the brain of the universe. And they also correspond to the universe on a subtle level. So people working in those fields are providing that energy in the universal body. I want to just briefly, in our last minute, say, is there anybody outside these fields? Now, of course, Ruchir and I looked, first of all, at the concept of criminals. Who are criminals? And our conclusion was that most criminals are people misusing a field. We wondered, is there anybody who doesn't fit in any of these? And we came up with the biological word commensals. So commensal is different from a parasite. A parasite takes and doesn't give anything. A commensal doesn't give anything but doesn't harm. It means to sit at the same table. A parasite is taking and harming. A commensal is taking but not harming. And this would be people who never really have a career in their life at all. Maybe we know some people like this. Some of these people travel around a lot. Jack of all trades, master of none is kind of this category. People who do a little bit here and there just so they can live, but they never develop a career. And a lot of these people, as we say, don't even have a home. They travel around, do a little of this, do a little of that. Now, these people don't provide a clear function or role in society. And they're certainly in the vast minority of the population. But sometimes commensals provide a unique sort of wisdom to society because they're outsiders. And in our book, we look at a few examples like this of people who were commensals. They didn't really fit in any particular field. They were basically outsiders, but they were able at certain key moments in history to provide an outsider perspective. And there's also in the Sanskrit literature, there's a term called avaduta for someone who's on such a high spiritual level that they basically don't have any career. They're functioning so much apart from society that they don't fit in any of these fields and don't have any career. So in the interest of ending on time, which it is, and we only have a half an hour break, which is not a long time. And so what we're going to be looking at when we come back is looking at, now that we've defined the fields, at least to a large extent, as much as we could do in an hour and a half, we're now going to be looking at these more in relation to ourselves. So we touched on that this morning, well, early this afternoon rather, and in our next session, we're going to go deeper into this. What's the initial proclivities that can indicate which of these fields we're suited for, and what's expertise. So, Krishna willing, we'll see you back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.